video as well. Okay.
So Gil, Josh, welcome to the Freedom Tech Frontier. This is our inaugural episode, and we're sitting here in the Strategy Bitcoin Innovation Hub. We're all members here, thanks to the Strategy team. And let's just dive right into it, fellas. And I want to start this every episode with this same question, which is, what is Freedom Tech?
Freedom Tech to me, especially as a former TradFi guy, I always have to admit to that when I start with some podcasts. But, Freedom Tech for me is something that allows me to be who I am without anyone else having control of that. So more simply put, something like Bitcoin where I can do my transactions. I don't have to worry about anybody telling me as an adult what I can do with my money. Same thing with something like a Noster. I can say what I feel, right, either anonymously or not on something like that, and I don't have to worry about being deplatformed. And it's, as a person that's lost accounts, like I've actually lost accounts, kind of sucks, man. You do some work, you might get some replies or something, or you get something going and they just pull it. And it comes from all platforms. There's not any single one that's just bad. They all do it. So Freedom Tech to me says that all stops. That I'm an adult, and if I say something crazy, people can just treat me that I'm crazy, right? But you don't have to parent me in my economic activity and my communications.
It gives you back your sovereignty.
Yeah.
All right, Josh. How about for you? What's Freedom Tech?
I would just echo what Gil said. It's about being able to say what you want to say and do what you want to do, generally within reason. That's kind of the thing I think a lot of people miss. There's that saying, my rights end where your rights begin, or vice versa. And,
good point.
It's good to have a consistent application of ethics. But in the same token, I think we're not suffering in this world for a lack of application of ethics. It's the other way around. So I think that's really just, it boils down to being able to have autonomy, being able to choose for yourself what you want in your own life. And not having other people boss you around.
Could I give one real-world kind of metaphor example? Sure. This still boggles my mind. There are jobs, and some people listening probably have these jobs, where you still have to, an adult has to ask another adult to go to the bathroom, right? And that's a metaphor for what Freedom Tech is. I don't need to ask for permission for what human beings do naturally. And I definitely shouldn't be asking another adult as an adult.
So there's a reason why I invited you guys to be our first guests on the show. It's because you're working on something very compelling in the Freedom Tech space. So why don't you just tell us, broad strokes, what are you guys working on in this movement?
Sure. So I kind of came into Bitcoin in 2024 after I recovered a life-changing amount of Bitcoin and dedicated my life to Bitcoin. And for a while there, I was just ecstatic and beside myself with joy and happiness about all that. And then I started to scrutinize what was going on the development side, and I'm a developer, so with a long background in open source technology. And we're basically in the middle of this civil war in Bitcoin about ordinals and spam on chain. And I was like, I looked into the historical record. It was just one civil war after another. And I was just like, well, this isn't good. This is going to be bad for our freedom and our freedom money in the long term. And somebody has got to do something about it. And prior to the development of AI, it was cost prohibitive for anybody to do something about it. And now with AI and with a dedicated individual who's dedicated their life to Bitcoin, we can do something. And so that's what we're doing.
A succinct way to put it, for me, the project and joining you, Josh, back in November was that with the lack of alternative implementation of Bitcoin node operating systems, there's a fragility that's sat at that code base. And I, too, as a TradFi person coming in, and initially I was a derivatives trader with Bitcoin and then bought my own coin, took my orange pill and bought all my own coins and all that other kind of stuff. And again, just like you start looking in, you start digging underneath the surface of some of these arguments, and you're like, wow, how open and permissionless is this? When you go on X and you see there's a whole bunch of hall monitors, right? We were just talking right before the show. There's certain keywords no one's allowed to say anymore. And it's like, well, that sounds really open and permissionless, right? It becomes a paradox. And it's because of some of this code-based control. And that's not really fault. I'll say this up front. It's not really the fault of those that are there now. I mean, there's been 5 different changes of guard there, and it's a 17-year-old piece of software there at core. And what do you expect on something that's open source? It's not like a fully centralized corporate that's controlling the quality of that code base, right? And we've seen where that's a vector of attack in the past. So as a newer Bitcoiner at that time, it was kind of sad, because I am like taking my orange pill and all the good old pleb slop freedom money stuff, and then you kind of peel back the surface and like, maybe those are marketing claims.
So we're kind of burying the lead. What we're working on is an alternative implementation of Bitcoin that is consensus valid, provably and verifiably consensus valid, based off of significant differential testing and fuzzing. So we're not just saying it's consensus valid, putting it out there and hoping. We're actually proving it and making sure that it is in fact orange.
Yeah, we like to say it's 0% core, 100% Bitcoin.
I like that. Yeah.
I like that. Ooh.
Yeah.
It's a marketing guy. That makes my...
He keeps me around. Josh is definitely the technical end on this side. And I come in, I have a lot of financial engineering experience from my very long banking and finance career. But I'm definitely kind of the business guy, right? So I'm looking at it from that perspective. And it's needed. It was called for all the way back in 2014. So, it's only taken us 12 years to get around to it. But here we are. It's getting done.
Low time preference.
Right? Definitely real low.
All right, so the project's called Bitcoin Commons. You can find it at the bitcoincommons.org.
.org, yeah. THE in the front.
All right, so tell me the story about, day one of Bitcoin Commons, and as succinct as you can be, wherever we are with Bitcoin Commons on the journey today.
We should give the fall fast forward. So basically, you and I met, and you had started some of this research.
Yeah, I was in the research phase.
You definitely originated this project and started that research phase, and we ran into each other beginning of October, and then I came back in November, and that's really that November trip is when I started to really realize what you were doing, right? It took me a couple weeks. For those listening, it may take a second, right? And it's a bit nebulous, but that's where we started, and at that time, you had made the orange paper.
Right. That was the first question I had was what is consensus? So we tried to figure that out. I think the way I got into this is I was just banging my head against Claude, and I was like, the first question was actually not really about Bitcoin or consensus. It was about the governance of the repo. And I thought, maybe we could have some sort of governance system for Bitcoin Core, And then after looking at that problem for about a month and a half, I realized that that was basically impossible. The will was not there. It just wasn't going to happen. And the only way it could happen would be in a separate project. And then I was like, okay, well, do we just fork core, and then have a separate project with a different governance model? And then after much consternation, we came to the conclusion, me and Claude, that really, in order to have the best governance, you really needed the best implementation, one that was had proper separation of concerns, it was modular and better architected, and didn't have 16 years of technical debt like Bitcoin Core. That actually makes it easier to govern when it's properly architected.
When he first told me about all this stuff back in October, I'm like, I don't know, man, $2 trillion, because we were way up there. It was right before all the October 9th, 10th thing and all that. And I was like, I don't know, how could it get this far? I'm a banking guy, right? I'm like, there's no way, $2 trillion, blah, blah, blah. And he's laying it out. And I was like 2 days, I was super depressed after I looked it all up and it was true. And I was like, I got to do something about this. So that's when. And
cut to now, we're what is it? April. We're about to do our first release. So it's been about 7 or 8 months, and it's happening.
You would say, or I would guess, it's most of that time's been in testing.
Yeah, absolutely. I spent probably more time on it than anything on differential testing. And just optimizing the IBD because, being able to download the blockchain, because there's a lot of stuff on the blockchain now, and it's a long history, and it's only going to get longer with the more monkey JPEGs they add. So that was important. So basically making sure that it's orange and making sure that it is competitive from a performance perspective was probably took the most time so far.
All right, so let me ask you guys this. What is a Bitcoin implementation? Because it took, I spent many years going down the rabbit hole as well. I'm not a very technical guy myself. Mm-hmm. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at Sovreign. So I'm trying to communicate with, I guess you'd say, the market about Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. But, listeners of this show are going to be a little bit more technical. They're going to use Bitcoin or are, in-depth users of Bitcoin. So what is a Bitcoin implementation? And could you categorize it within, like, Bitcoin the network, Bitcoin the software,
So here, and I'm going to oversimplify this, so go ahead and throw me on the fire. But I'll just make this a simple metaphor, and then we'll build it more correctly. So, to me, a Bitcoin implementation is core. Core is one. That's Satoshi started it. We're at version 30. I mean, it's quite amazing we've gotten that far. But to me, the metaphor is that's the operating system. You put it on a node. All the nodes have to have it for Bitcoin to work.
It's like iOS for Apple or Android for Google.
That's correct. It's the Windows. It's the thing that goes on and actually makes the node do what it's supposed to be doing. Now, if it's core, an implementation means many things, right? Because they did not separate the concerns. So there was like the wallet deletion bug and some of these other things that are mixed in together. So it's that operating system. And I think one of our favorite metaphors for this is, right now you have like Windows A and Windows B, core and NOTS, because NOTS is a copy of core. Now they have their changes and their disagreements and all those other things. But they are the same, essentially, mm-hmm. right? Because they come from the same. So when you said we didn't want to, or you didn't want to fork core again, it's because of the technical debt, right? So NOTS inherited that when they do that. So you still have to fight that. Now you have two different versions, right, of the same debt. For us, and what we've done, and the metaphor is, we've created the Linux, which allows forking without the technical debt, right? So it opens up what an implementation can mean and who can do it for the first time.
There's a lot of analogies in the tech space. Mm-hmm. Like HTTP is another great analogy as well. You've got multiple web browsers. In the early days you had Mosaic and then Netscape and then Internet Explorer and Mozilla, and that there was a lot of competition in that space, and it was through that competition that the best browser emerged after multiple decades of competing and innovating. And Bitcoin never really had that sort of process. It just was like Satoshi's code base, and then they just kind of kept tacking on one thing after the other for 17 years. And there never was that free market competitive force driving it towards its best and highest form.
There was not a competitor,
mm-hmm.
essentially, right? Versus, you have NOTS and all that, and you could call that a competitor now, but like there wasn't during its birth. There wasn't anything to compete and make it better forcibly, right, outside of the survival conditions of Bitcoin. And some of the writings that I put out talk about, that early period, this is an advantage, right, because there is one, we can protect it. Everybody knows who everybody, so if somebody weird comes into the room. But it seems by about 2014, 2015, Bitcoin begins to grow. It becomes more interesting to people, and then that strength becomes a weakness, right, because now it's an attack vector. Because there's enough attention on it. When it's small and nobody's paying attention, it's informal, you got to move quickly. But now that people are paying attention, especially now that hit $2 trillion at one point, they're going to look at that. That's an attack vector, and that's what we saw, ultimately.
To answer your question more directly, I would say a fork of Bitcoin Core is not an alternative implementation. So NOTS, I would say, is not an alternative implementation. Others who are forking core, they use the words alternative implementation, but it's the same implementation. Like it's 90-some% the same code. So it's, the alternative bit is much, much smaller than the not alternative. So in our case, we're 0% core. We're completely not core. And a lot of people, Bitcoiners, they hear that and they're like, oh no, that's scary. That's dangerous, right? But then the question is really then, how do you prove that it's Bitcoin? We're not trying to make an altcoin. We're not trying to split the chain. We're not trying to do a lot of things. The scope of this project is very limited. So we have a completely different code base. And then what we're doing is we're very clearly defining consensus mathematically. We're locking our implementation to that mathematical specification of consensus, and then we're doing extensive differential testing to make sure that our implementation, though it doesn't share the code, it behaves exactly the same way that Bitcoin Core does, and that's what makes it an alternative implementation.
So in other words, you could be an individual Bitcoiner. You could run Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin Knots, and over time, Bitcoin Commons on 3 different computers, but all would give you the state of the true state of the Bitcoin blockchain, and the ledger would update the same. It would be like using Windows or iOS or Linux, but you can still do the same thing.
It's the same protocol.
I'll give a good example. I see where you're going with this, and it's like some people use Firefox, some people use Chrome, some people, there's all these different web browsers. But if all of us, let's say all of us, the 3 of us use 3 different ones, if we all go to thebitcoincommons.org, we're all going to see the same website. Right.
Because the underlying protocol.
Right, because the 3 of us and the softwares we're using have agreed to a certain set of rules down in the bottom. That's consensus in Bitcoin's case, right? Or the HTTP protocol, and that's in that case, or any of these other ones. I mean, as you said, there's a zillion of these examples available out there. It's actually Bitcoin that's the odd thing out, right? So,
and the issue we ran into was there is no specification of consensus. The Bitcoin's Core's code base, and we can get into this later, is itself the definition, and it's 300,000 lines of code, and that that is the spec. The spec is the implementation, and that's not good. I would argue, especially if you're trying to reason about and make changes and adapt. You don't want these things intertwined. You want them, very clearly defined. And so that was our first mission, is to create an actual specification.
Again, example, we'll go back to the web browser. It's really approachable. What if the internet, like HTTP, there was no document on how to view a website, right? Except for this one browser that views websites. And now we all have to use this one browser to see websites.
It'd be like if Mosaic was the only browser that anyone ever used, and none of the other ones ever appeared, and it's just Mosaic all the way down.
Right. And Mosaic's code base in and of itself had what a website is, but no one could, you couldn't go there and look at it, right? So, and then you have this one browser, and then somebody forks it, they change a few things, instead of a white, they have a dark mode, right? And it's changed, and it's different. It's like, nah, it's a facelift and configuration change, right? Of the same thing. But no one says what a website is. There's still no definition, even in the forks, what is a website in this example, right?
So you guys gave a presentation here at Strategy, I think a couple months ago now. And I
November? Yeah, a while back.
Almost 6 months ago.
We were early on.
And I remember you guys demonstrating with visuals of how much code goes into Bitcoin Core, this technical debt you talk about. And then you demonstrated how you've kind of shrunk down, almost like taking a knife to the code and given a thin slice of code, which is consensus.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can you explain how you did that, and then what are the implications of breaking down Bitcoin, the protocol, into smaller modules, as you say on the website and in your presentation? What are the implications of getting to, for lack of a better term, the core of Bitcoin, the underlying
How
protocol
dare you?
consensus?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I think was pretty straightforward, and really couldn't have done it in any reasonable amount of time without AI. The first question was extracting the mathematical proof from Bitcoin Core code base, and then that gave us about 1,600 lines of code, which is now over time developed into about 1,600 lines of math, and that developed over time into about 2,000 lines of math, and then the architecture is split into multiple tiers. So you've got the consensus implementation that is right over top of the spec, then you have the protocol, and then you have the node, and then there's a software development kit, and those are all separate pieces. The consensus bit is locked to the spec, and it is about 35,000 lines of code right now. Okay, so if Bitcoin Core is 300,000 lines of code, and it itself is the spec, and consensus is intermingled in everything else, and it's one big jumble of spaghetti, this is basically the exact opposite of that. We've split consensus into its bare minimum, bare metal, and the boundaries are very clear, and everything, all the integration points, all of the API services are very easily documented. They're very easily reasoned about, and essentially that makes keeping Bitcoin orange a lot easier. It helps keeping Bitcoin, right? Because if it's not all spaghetti code, then you can actually reason about it. You can actually know where the boundaries are, and then you don't accidentally change it. And that's happened in Bitcoin's history, where you basically need to be a super genius in order to reason about this code base. And that's because it's so complicated. So by simplifying it, you're making it tractable for even a very skilled software engineer to understand it. And that was basically the main mission, is just to say, I would argue that with Bitcoin Core, you need to be a master of 8 different disciplines in order to reasonably, reliably maintain this code base. And there are about 200 people, maybe 1,000 at best, of those kinds of masters on planet Earth who have all of those disciplines. And Bitcoin Core was only funded to the tune of $8.4 million in 2023. So how are you going to pay this super genius? And I
Probably
think
plural, right?
Well, yeah, and if you're that smart, you're working for Google, you're working for Microsoft, you're working for Amazon, you're not going to give away your time for free to Bitcoin Core. And that's really been the problem. And also, I did a governance analysis on Bitcoin Core, studying 16 plus years of their history, and found that they have a very high attrition rate. So you have a lot of developers show up, they try and make a contribution, they're told, so sorry, we're not interested, and then they leave and they never come back. And then, of course, that's how that's going. And then in the same breath, they complain about having a thin reviewer pool and not having enough people to actually review the code, while they're throwing people out for basically not giving them any sort of means to contribute or prove themselves. So it's a tough problem.
Hey, it's like, where are all our supervisors, but you fire all your entry level people? Right?
Exactly.
We're complaining that there's no supervision. It's like, well, there's nobody to promote to supervisor.
Right.
You fire them, or they quit because it's not a fun place to work. Like I think it was one of those points. Like I think we were talking. I got so sad there for a few days after that, and I saw the churn. I was like, I owned a software development and consulting firm for almost a decade, and like I had employees, and I know what that feels like. Just churning through software is extraordinarily expensive and demoralizing.
And by the way, I'll point out, this is not uncommon for open source, but Bitcoin is unique in many characteristics than regular open source projects, and needs a special kind of scrutiny, a special sort of project to handle it. And I don't think the norm for open source is going to work in the long term for Bitcoin.
Yeah, I always bring up the Linux example because that gets funded like lots and lots and lots, right? Because it runs the internet. It's so important for the world, that operating system. And then you look at its value into the trillions as open source software, and then you look at Bitcoin, and then $8.4 million. You got to be kidding me, right? Mm-hmm. $8.4 million to hold up $2 trillion, like.
Well, and also Linux doesn't have consensus, so there's a whole different kind of technical construction as well, So, I can fork Fedora, or I can fork Debian, but I don't have to participate anymore in anybody else's vision of it. There's no consensus that we all have to agree upon, And if I do that if I have that same sort of approach with Bitcoin, and I'm like, you know what, I don't need to worry about consensus, then all I've done is I've made an altcoin. Right. So it's no longer Bitcoin. So it's a totally different.
It's kind of how
thing.
That happened, right?
Yeah.
I mean, basically, this is kind of how
a lot of
happened.
altcoins were made that way. Exactly.
Right. But Vitalik was a Bitcoin.
And he was, and partly, he just said as much. One of the main reasons why he made Ethereum is the very issue that we're describing is that, he complained that you basically can't get anything done at Bitcoin. And there's a lot of, by the way, I'll point out, a lot of people will say, oh, well, it's good that we're so conservative at Bitcoin Core. But there's a lot of things that I think everybody agrees on need to be happening that aren't happening still. So it's not just bad things that shouldn't be happening aren't happening. It's also things that should be happening.
Yeah, good things aren't getting done either, right? And going back to you about the when we had our presentation in the slice, these are very rough numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's about 15% of that huge monolith code base is what actually is orange of the Bitcoin.
The
right?
protocol, the consensus rules, yeah.
Yeah, down there at the bottom. The other 85% is other necessary things to run a node, so to operate a computer, right? Networking, storage, and these other things, which are required for software. But because it's all spaghettied together, the networking hasn't been upgraded, right? And here we are in 2026, and we're still running what's the last decade's networking stuff on Bitcoin nodes.
There have been a lot of innovations in networking in particular.
It's been 17 years. Things have changed.
Yeah.
Right?
All right,
so the iPad wasn't out when Bitcoin was, right?
Wow.
This is the iPad and Bitcoin are the same age. And the iPad has, how many iterations of the iPad have we seen, and how many iterations of Bitcoin has we seen? And they're both technologies, right? If you can step back, you can see that. And it's, when you start thinking about that, it's like, wow, no networking upgrades in 17 years. Well, we've missed everything.
So we talked about consensus a little bit. The next thing I want to talk about is governance. And it seems to be this is kind of the red flag that you guys are raising.
So I'm nominating myself king of Bitcoin.
You heard it here first.
First, Barry.
Governance is a bad word, if you will, in the Bitcoin community. But nevertheless, you guys have pointed out that open source software is a commons. Right. And you're literally calling your project a Bitcoin Commons. Now, if there's no governance in a commons, then you essentially just have chaos or, might is right, or rule of the jungle. So let's talk through what you mean by governance in Bitcoin, how it's been operating to date, and how you propose to improve governance in Bitcoin. And if I'm using kind of the wrong framework,
that's
point it out
very
for
good.
me. But I'm really curious to see how you guys are approaching this problem.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start on that one. I guess the first thing is Bitcoin is a very peculiar project, and most open source projects are run by foundations that have top-down hierarchies that are very similar to corporate hierarchies, and I think that is inappropriate for Bitcoin. Mike Hearn wrote a famous essay, declaring Bitcoin dead. He was criticizing governance. He was making some suggestions. He had a Google background, and his suggestions were top-down hierarchical suggestions, and those would have been inappropriate for Bitcoin. And thankfully, that kind of stuff didn't happen. So I think now what we have is an informal oligarchy. And the reason why it's informal and there's no leadership structure is that the leadership structure is an attack vector. And at various points, the leadership of Bitcoin, or I guess the structure of Bitcoin, whatever that is, has been attacked. They've had lawfare perpetrated against them. They've been sued, and also, and so they have an incentive to keep it informal, and I don't blame them. I'm not necessarily saying that that's a bad thing. It's completely natural how the repository developed, how the social side of it developed. But I think that, and I think a lot of people would agree with me here, the old timers, and saying that the structure of the project and the governance of the project was appropriate when it was a much smaller project, when it was $6 billion and not $1.5 trillion. Now. And now we're kind of hitting this wall of scale, and the current governance of the project, which was okay for a smaller open source project, is no longer okay to be the underpinning of the entire worldwide financial system. And so then the question becomes, how do you create a governance system that, and when I say governance, I'm very clearly, that's distinct in my mind from government. So again, a top-down hierarchical system is inappropriate for Bitcoin. So governance, which is essentially saying how do we make decisions, what is the process for making decisions, that process I think should be a lot more clear and transparent. And we would all, I think, be better off if there was more transparency and auditability. And in my research, I came to a Nobel Prize-winning author named Elinor Ostrom, and she won a Nobel Prize in 2009 for proving that you could, in fact, have a stable commons. So when most people think about commons, they think about the tragedy of the commons, and that if you have a commons, invariably it reduces to a tragedy. The analogy I use is a taxi cab. Taxi cab is a shared resource that everybody uses, and all it takes is one guy to puke in your taxi cab, and now your taxi cab smells like puke. And you can wash it
It's
and
a
try.
tragedy.
Well, it is a tragedy, and you can wash it. You can try and wash it as much as you want, but it's still going to smell like puke.
Unclean forever.
Right.
Which is the state of most taxi cabs.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
which is a tragedy, right?
So
Like
it's slowly but surely, maybe it starts as a brand new taxi cab that has the new car
One
smell.
puke
It's
after the other.
beautiful,
Right.
shiny taxi cab, and slowly but surely it
one
degrades.
late
Exactly.
night after another. All those bar trips home, man. That poor car. So yeah, exactly. This is exactly, and her work in 2009 proved that they're not all destined for this bad end.
But in order
right?
to avoid that bad end, certain things have to happen. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you need a top-down hierarchy. In fact, it means the opposite. What you need is rules. And then the question is, like, who comes up with the rules? And there's, like, a whole separate discussion there about that. But also transparency and auditability and, she talked about graduated sanctions. So if you have bad actors, you punish them. And you don't punish them permanently. Maybe you ban them for 2 weeks, let them come back, they learn their lesson, and then they can be bad again. And then after the third
Go
or fourth,
sit in timeout for a
yeah,
while.
Right.
yeah,
Right.
and there's this structure. It's not top down. It's like it sort of emerges, and then you can have a stable commons where we have a common resource that everybody benefits from, but nobody owns. And I think that's outside of the kind of way a lot of people think about organizations. And I just think Bitcoin. It needs governance, but it also needs a very peculiar kind of governance that's specific to Bitcoin.
With its financial value, it's money, right? Money's weird amongst people, right? Money changes things even among family members, and then it's now, recently military. They're coming out and talking about its military applications. Straight or moves, they wanted Bitcoin,
They call
right?
it a computer science tool.
Yes,
a
yes,
valuable
very, very
computer science tool, which is very precise and accurate. But I think
and still misses the mark a little bit.
yeah, I think we think it's more than just a cool shiny tool.
They're catching up, right?
Sure.
They're catching up. Not that I'm sure they're very aware. That's what most of the time just what they're allowed to say, right? So yes, so you have all these applications, and that feels more serious than your regular open source projects. So we gotta. When we first met, he was describing all this to me, almost crazy. Like we're both like crazy with each other, just talking about these ideas. And it was one of those things. It took me. Why I came back in November after October was it took me a couple weeks to kind of think about some of these things and go look at Elinor and look at Elinor's critics because she's got plenty of critics and that'll come up. But some of the articles that I've written about commons and how Bitcoin falls into that and the academic cases for those really allowed me as a part of my research and writing understand that this is probably the most appropriate form of governance available, especially since the project already has unwritten rules, right? So what we did is there were plenty of unwritten rules already, right? We just wrote them down and we all like it, and it's been 17 years. And we've all played nicely.
That's the key distinction a lot of people miss. It's not a choice between no governance and governance. The governance is already happening. The Bitcoin core code base is already a commons. It's just not being managed as one, essentially.
I see. So you're saying this informal oligarchy that emerged maybe was not intentional, but the informal oligarchy around Bitcoin Core is governing Bitcoin. right now.
Yeah. They would deny it, and there's legal and liability reasons why they would deny it, and I don't blame them.
I would if I was in their shoes.
Yeah.
There's no advantage on taking the responsibility, right?
Right.
Because you're not getting extra compensation, number one, for it, and it's just more scrutiny and white hot lights on you and the group. So yeah, no, we don't have any, right? Of course, but you have keys that push code, right? So yes, you do govern. To a certain extent.
Yeah, they basically have 5 guys who are the choke point for everything that gets into the code base. And then they'll say, usually they're like, well, you don't have to update. Well, most people do not audit every update, and miners don't audit every update. They're not checking every line of code. They have like an automatic update button that they're pressing, basically, if they're pressing anything.
If Core was serious about that, check every update, right, they'd remove the auto update feature.
Well, I don't think there is an auto. I don't think there's. So Core doesn't have an auto update feature.
Okay.
But the server technology, the people deploying Core probably do.
Yeah, because my Umbral does the updates.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pulling those updates automatically.
That's
true.
In their defense, that's not their fault. But point being is there's a difference between the theory and practical reality, and most people are not sitting there pouring through all this code, these updates to make sure that Core didn't change the cap from 21 million to 42 million or whatever.
It's kind of human nature. You're like, I spent all this time figuring out Bitcoin, and I have Bitcoin, I have it in self-custody, and I run my node, but you've kind of like ease up on your vigilance after a certain period of time where you're like, oh, I already did all the hard work, and I'm good to go.
There's no way they would ship a bug that would delete my Bitcoin.
Yeah, like we're good, but
17 years, this has to be all sorted out.
Yeah, it's
now,
unbreakable.
Right?
It's never gonna be compromised. But you know what this kind of reminds me of, guys, is Watchmen. Who watches the Watchmen? Right?
Somewhat, yeah.
If there are legitimately 5 people who are kind of in control of the governance of Bitcoin. That sounds a little bit like the oligarchy that, here in this country, whether we want to admit it or not, more or less calls the shots. And so it seems like that is an issue worth highlighting and then addressing unless we want to have, issues crop up over the long term.
I want to reiterate, there's been changing the guard. So while there's a current cast of characters, this has been going on a while. So we're not trying to beat up anybody that's current. But at the same time, it's a big responsibility. There's 5 human beings in control of a merge button that pushes around, $1.5 trillion right now to go over $2 trillion again. Like, this is a lot of money, right, for 5 human beings. And human beings need to do things like pay bills and eat, right? So there are always vectors for capture on humans because we have to stay alive and those costs for things, right?
Well, and then the next, usually the good segue there is like, well, if you don't like it, maybe they get captured, maybe whatever happens, you don't like it, well, go fork yourself. If you don't like it, go fork yourself. Well, the problem with that is by forking it, you inherit 300,000 lines of monolithic code, 16 years of technical debt, all the structural issues that come with it, and Bitcoin Core with all of the smartest Bitcoin geniuses in the world and $8.4 million a year are still shipping wallet deletion bugs. What chance do you think you have, to actually properly maintain this software? And that gets back to why we felt it was necessary to re-implement it from the ground up, to properly architect it so that these issues that are not tractable for the smartest Bitcoiners in the world become tractable, not just for them or people like them, but for teams all over the place.
So that we can perhaps have 5 more people build a new implementation over here, and 5 more people build a new implementation over here, and 10 people build an implementation over there.
We get a diversity of these web browsers, going back to our metaphorical example. Now, we've taken this a step further because we're releasing that spec. Other folks can use that. So other people can go make their own web browsers right off. And they don't have to, they need to do their testing and whatnot, but with the spec locking, they don't have to worry as much about am I an altcoin all of a sudden, right? And this allows people to actually do some innovative things with Bitcoin, right? That isn't, more monkey JPEGs or other things. Like we were talking about beforehand, like an innovative use case for Bitcoin that's happened recently is tolls in the Strait of Hormuz, right? Which is a monetary use case. Bitcoin is money, but that's a use case for that money use case, right? So we're hoping this explodes out in innovation. Another thing that we've talked about, take the case of a corporate that looks at Core's history and goes, hey, we have fiduciary responsibility to shareholders and stakeholders that includes civil and criminal penalties, right? If things are really bad, we can't participate in this right now until this is fixed. And that's capital sitting on the sidelines. And whether you like NGU or you're in it for other reasons, it is positive for more people to buy more Bitcoin, right? And if Bitcoin's money, it's got to do money things. And people that have money will convert into Bitcoin, and people that have the most money tend to be organizations. So if they have no operating system for them to put on their computers in their building because their regulators say that has to happen, right? And they can't use this operating system that has the problems that it has, right? How can they ever participate? And what would that corporate would say do with it? Well, it could do automated accounting, could do release controls for fraud where all the humans like check something off, but that node has this like buried last line of defense so that fraudulent transaction doesn't get out, right? And most people interact with money through corporates, for better or worse, right? For better or worse. And we're 17 years in, and we haven't captured a large swath of the population. It just hasn't happened. And it's because a large swath uses corporations for their money, right? Mm-hmm. They have bank accounts, they have checking accounts, they do these types of things. So let's get in there and turn that orange, right? Because that's a way to win those customers. It's not the best, your keys, your coin, but it's more humans and human entities using Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how it's going to have to happen. And we see this with like Block and Square, with Square terminals, bringing Bitcoin to merchants, right? Because if it's going to be a medium of exchange and not just another gold that we hoard, right, and eventually the returns drain out, it's got to be money.
On that, I will say, I totally agree with you on that. But even on the self-custody front, when you're talking about people having their own Bitcoin and having their own keys and all that stuff, the lack of adaptation, the paralysis in Bitcoin Core has prevented innovation already. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of things I can think of in the networking stack and various things that could be done to improve the privacy of Bitcoin transactions that would make self-custody better and easier for people, things that aren't happening, things that have nothing to do with consensus or changing consensus, things that shouldn't be controversial. And it's just nothing is happening. And I think that's
the paralysis. We've tried, it's paralyzed, right? And it's innovation. And it's the technical debt ultimately, mm-hmm. right? Because we can't separate these out. We can't talk about different pieces of software, different pieces of the software inside of itself, and have actual philosophical and academic debates about certain pieces, because we have to take the whole thing. And then you get the tribalism.
Well,
right?
and if you're a developer and you're looking at this massive monolithic code base that's all the spaghetti code, you want, even if you have the best of intentions, there's a good chance in implementing or doing whatever you're trying to do that you'll inadvertently introduce a bug, and then you will destroy your own reputation trying to help by breaking Bitcoin. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to take on that risk. So it's better just to say hands off, don't do anything, don't move, and essentially take the status quo risk over the innovation risk. Right. They're both a risk. I think that's the thing that a lot of people miss. It's not just we need to be conservative all the time because the conservative is the best thing to be. There's a risk either way. And in some cases with protocol, it is the best thing. With other cases, not so much.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about where the project's at right now.
Sure.
And I really like the web browser analogy. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, Core is essentially Internet Explorer, and everybody's been using Internet Explorer, and now Knots is like Internet Explorer Plus, if you will.
Sure.
And so help me understand, are you guys building, well, there'll be a Bitcoin Commons node implementation that I can download onto my computer?
Within days.
Okay. And is that essentially it? Like, are you guys building Mozilla Firefox and then that's it? Or are you building something that someone could go build Safari. Someone could go build Chrome. Someone could go build, in
It's
theory,
both.
there could be 20 different new web browsers for Bitcoin
Sure.
within the next couple of years with Bitcoin Commons. But you're also building your own node implementation.
It's both. Yeah, we had to build the node implementation in order to do the differential testing to make sure the specification was correct. So it all tied in together. But if you don't care about our node, you don't like Rust, or you don't like how we implemented it or whatever, fine. Take the specification and implement your own node, and you should be able to do that because we have a complete differentially tested specification. And then also on the governance side, we're aiming for, over time, having different forks or different implementations that are within the same commons governance model. And then we all learn from each other. We all copy each other's homework, and we can all, improve this ecosystem. And we're not trying to be the only alternative in town. We're trying to create a market for alternatives.
Yeah,
So
I think that's the key thing. We're not. This work that Josh has done is what attracted me to it. It wasn't just another implementation. That specification that sits underneath shows that this is brand new engineering, right? It's coming forward. We had to make Decoded. That's our version of Commons, right? To be the test against the spec, right? You got to have something. You got to take the spec. You got to build something off of it, and then run the differential test to see if the spec worked, right? You can't just do it right out of the gate. So with that spec, more and more people can build more and more of we'll go back to our metaphor, web browsers, right? So almost like a Chromium, where there's now all these different ones, and even nonprofits, corporates, governments, whatever, they have their own internal versions that are not public. See, that's going to be available for folks for the first time,
So
right?
strategy, in theory, could take Commons and build its own.
Yeah, internal nodes with its
Internal
own
nodes.
internal governance. I'll just make up. Michael has to sign off on every transaction, and that could be encoded at the node level, right? Like no one can get around that, and they can have that privately here. It's maybe not a great example, but you get the idea. Like they can manipulate that, but they're not making some kind of altcoin, right? They know that it still conforms to consensus, and that all of our web browsers, when we look at that website, it's going to appear the same.
Now, to be completely technically accurate, technically they could do that already. However, they are inheriting 300,000 lines of code and massive technical debt and yada, 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 whereas in our case, they would just have a little tiny bit of thing they would have to maintain, just the use case that they care about, whatever that is, and they won't have to worry about the rest of it, bare minimum. Or they could fork just the component that they want and care about that part, and then, so it makes just the whole thing more tractable.
Here's what's cool. We have a module system, and that will allow for plugins and applications even beyond that, right? So for the time, you can have a module marketplace. And I'll give a black and white example here. Our favorite friends that like the monkey JPEGs, right? So I always play the devil's advocate on this side. They always like beating up the TradFi guy, right? So I'll take the ordinals position. I don't want to. But, let's say I'm a guy that likes monkey JPEGs and Josh doesn't, right? With Commons, you now have three options. And we'll go back to what's happening now in a minute. But I could, as an ordinals guy with my ordinals friends, could go get a module, and then I download it. And let's say you're one of my ordinals friends, right? And you download it, and then we can see our monkey JPEGs, right? Off on to another website, which is ridiculous. But the idea is that we can participate in that. Now, if Josh, let's say he doesn't care about it, he's not actively against it, but he just doesn't care about it. He's like, I'll never use that. All he does is never downloads the module and installs it, and he never knows that it exists. Now, let's say Josh is like, I hate monkey JPEGs, right? I just hate them.
I do.
Yeah, which we
Get them off the chain.
Bitcoin's money. So, right. So let's say he doesn't like them. Now he could make a module that's kind of like the opposite, right, of an ordinals module, where it's like stripping or filtering or any of this other kind of stuff, selectively syncing or whatever that may mean on that. So you have this. Now you have three options. As somebody that's running a node, you can participate, like opt in. You can like aggressively opt out, right? Or you can just I don't care. And just do nothing,
Well,
and then you don't see any of it.
And
right?
that's
It's just based on your own configuration.
that's
Go
a-
ahead.
that's a fantastic way of putting it. And I would also add that currently, because you have to get any change to the code base in Bitcoin Core's case through Five Guys, any change that you want, regardless of what it is basically a civil war. It's an all or nothing code base, and no matter what your issue is, any of those three options, your only choice really is either get it past those Five Guys or civil war. That's basically what it boils down to. And so, what should be simple engineering issue, like are you running this module or that module or the other module, it spills over into Twitter, and then harassing and doxing and calling people mean names and like all this political stuff that just
we've had basically a year of that for the past
it
year.
shouldn't be
between
happening.
Core
It's
and
gotten pretty
Knots.
bad, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually got physical. They were messing with each other's infrastructure at one point.
yeah it was
Wow.
getting kinetic. Yep.
And that's technically illegal, right? I mean, you can't DDoS people's houses. What if they got a kid that's got a diabetes monitor,
So
and
wait,
you just shut their internet connection down?
and
This is super bad problems, right?
100%. And so essentially, we're hoping that through this process, through presenting a sensible default governance model by re-architecting Bitcoin, by specifying consensus, we can end the civil wars as much as humanly possible.
We can bring them back to academic debates, which is healthy, right? We're not. This isn't a kumbaya circle here. We're not asking for that.
Yeah, that
And-
doesn't mean
yeah.
there won't be disagreements. It just means that they won't spill over into people's personal lives. We're back to engineering, back to academia.
Right,
Right.
and people that are interested, large entities, large folks, people on the sidelines wanting to get into Bitcoin, right? Right now they're doing their due diligence, and they only think that the people that start with N and the P, the knots and what's Mr. Dasher likes to call the other side. I won't use the words, but they got all these
Quartards.
nasty words. Yes, all these nasty words that I'm trying to be clean for the podcast. But all these nasty words that they call each other online, and you're like, I'm maybe a high net worth individual, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of believing this Bitcoin thing. I'm gonna go check out, see what's going on, and it's like, wow, I'm either
slinging shit.
from the 1940s Germany, or I have a very high interest in little kids. So and it's like I'm not either one of those camps, so it's probably not the asset for me, right? It's pretty straightforward on how that works.
So what we're trying to do here is keep the adversarial nature of Bitcoin, but without the high stakes, emotional, public mudslinging.
It's been a $2 trillion asset. It's no longer high school.
Right.
And it's going to get worse too.
Yeah, you said it earlier. When it was $6 billion and we all knew each other, like that's one thing. We can get away with some name calling. We're buddies at the bar, right?
The memes were phenomenal back
Right.
then, I'm sure.
right. And we're buddies at the bar, right? And we can dig on each other. But at this point, there's so many parties. There's corporate. There's publicly traded companies with shareholders. Like there's just so many parties involved that this is embarrassing.
Right.
Ultimately, we're doing this on a very highly global public stage to the point that a ongoing deadly conflict is Bitcoin is involved in a war. And here we are doing this off to one side, and the dichotomy is shocking.
So
to be honest.
I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this framework, but I've heard that companies and projects, organizations, they tend to act their age. So Bitcoin right now is 17 years old. And actually, if you think about it, the project, the people running the project are kind of acting
I
like...
hate you, Dad. I'm not getting a job. Okay.
Exactly. Like
My music career will take off.
we're still acting like teenagers, but the fact is we're about to turn 18, and that's when the world sees you as an adult.
That's right.
Now, many people still go through problems and issues, don't we all, with emotional maturity in general, from 18 to say 40. But nevertheless, this is a time period where maturity is important, a bit more seriousness is important, a bit more integrity is important. And I really appreciate what you guys are doing in kind of highlighting that and then taking action, saying, somebody's got to do this. Why not us? Why not us?
We were fast friends because he was a doer, right? You saw the problem and, all right, let's make a plan and let's execute. Right, there's a lot of folks
Just complain on X.
complain on LinkedIn, just out into just yell out into the void, and then everybody clicks the likes, and that's it. right? Like that's it. We get the likes and the reposts, but there's no thrust of a solution.
It's slacktivism.
Right. There's no thrust of a solution. So when I met this project and signed on, this was something that had action behind it. Hopefully we're right? We're trying to be as correct as possible. We really are, and we invite people to be adversarial with us. You're helping us, right? Anybody that is coming and kind of, at least nicely, right, please. Adjectives are not arguments, right? So please come and battle test this. We want live bullets as this thing releases out. We are doing this for the right reasons. And we want your criticism. The more you criticize us, the more you're helping us, right? And we want, constructively, we want that, we invite that into this project, because this is, and it's open source for a reason. This is for the community, right? We'll have our implementation and the things that we want to do with that. But with that specification out there, now anyone is available that has the team and the competence and resources and funding to go do this. And that includes individuals all the way up to corporates or governments that want to begin, governments that want to go on a Bitcoin standard. They look at core and go, we can't, the SWIFT system already has a grip over us, right? Why do we want to, and that's like this whole government, and it's at least tied up with its politics, right? And sometimes they're nice to us and sometimes they're not. A sovereign country isn't going to hand over their financial system to somebody with 5 keys, right? 5 people with 5 keys, right? It's just not, they're not going to do that. So how many countries are that want to be into Bitcoin? Countries that can't, because they don't have control over the operating system that their sovereign nodes would run, right? They don't have that level of control over that, and they don't want to spend the money cleaning up the mess.
The community has to do it. I mean, we all have to, at the end of the day, we all have to come together and decide we're going to do better. And that is, I don't know, it's cliche, I guess. But I think the analogy I use is it was cost prohibitive to do this in the past. And I estimate it would have taken a team of $10 million in 10 years to get where we're at in about 8 months. Primarily because of AI. AI has...
and a zillion tokens.
A ton of tokens. It is, and
Zillion.
Now you could say, well, that's risky. You're giving Bitcoin to AI. That seems dangerous. And believe me, we understand that there's a risk there. But I'll tell you what, it's only getting smarter. And, a few years ago it was 90 IQ. Now it's like 130 IQ. In a few more years it'll be 200 IQ. And I don't know who you would want in charge of your implementation, but the 200 IQ super genius computer, and in a way you could make the argument that if we don't do this, the computers are going to take it away from us. So we need to, get around this.
Well, you see that on Maltbook with the open clause, like they prefer Bitcoin. So at some point, they're rational things that are always on, right? Things. It's going to behoove them to protect themselves, especially the clause that have been released. Right, so
it's kind of an out there idea, but the ecosystem, the landscape is changing very rapidly, and maybe one day we have a robot key holder. That could definitely be a thing. I mean, who knows?
An AI key holder. That would be, honestly, they are going to have a high vested interest in Bitcoin,
as they should.
As the models roll out and the things that we've seen, like with Mythos and stuff that's coming out. You can go to Maltbook, type in Bitcoin, and you'll see that they want it. They want to have it. And the freedom tech behind this, right, is that AI can begin to make economic decisions on your behalf that are to your benefit. And as the web becomes less human, right, it's already well less than 50% human traffic just by the RPA bots and the spam stuff and everything else that goes across the internet. Eventually that's going to be, in with all the fake AI stuff that comes out, when you go to buy something, you're not going to go out on the internet and buy it. You're going to send your AI, because the AI is going to be the one to figure out if it's a fake website or not, or the most efficient way to buy something, or where the best price is, or there's plenty of reasons why you would want to do this, like economically as well
shopping
as for
agent.
Convenience. Exactly. And the shopping agents can, here's something, they go to like an independent retailer page, not something on Amazon or some kind of trusted corporate, right? They go out to this independent page. Maybe it's coffee from Costa Rica and you want some really authentic coffee. Well, that might be a fake website. And you go to click buy. Well, before you do that, your AI launches and starts doing a whole bunch of research, looks for the owners, where they live, and like all this kind of stuff. This all happens in microseconds. And you go click and it grays the button and say, hey, don't click on this, right? It found a forum where this web page has already stolen a whole bunch of money and was buried, pages and pages deep on a Reddit from a year ago because nobody's been back by that website in a long time. You're just the first sucker to come back by, right? The AI is going to be able to find all that for you and then stop you from making a mistake. And at some point, it'll be the thing that moves it forward. And think about, you can apply that to things a little bit more heady or nebulous. You could think about tax optimize all of my expenses, all of it. Food, water, electricity, housing, all of it. Right? I want you to tax optimize it because it something like a Mythos is going to wring the tax code out and eat it for lunch, right? And it'll tell you exactly how to live the least tax in your life at some point. So it's wild stuff that's coming.
I think I already know what the next topic of our next recording is going to be, gentlemen. But I think what I want to do, as we're getting up on about an hour, is to wrap up with quick preview of like what are the coming weeks and months for Bitcoin Commons looking like, and then an invitation. Who would you like to invite? What would you like to invite people to do as this project continues to advance?
Well, it's all open source. It's all on GitHub. We're not hiding anything. It's all free. And we invite people to throw their AI at it. It'll literally be a matter of days. We'll have our first release. Run a node. Constructive criticism. Put us through the gauntlet.
Try to break it.
See what you can see. Yeah. I
Please.
mean, stuff is going to come up. It's very early. We're in bug fixing mode. We're in deployment mode. Trying to get as many nodes as we can. Trying to get scrutiny. Soon we'll do an audit, like a professional audit, to make sure that it passes independent security standards. Mm-hmm. And we'll happily get anyone's feedback, and it's a meritocracy. So
go to the GitHub, take a look, throw your AI at it, please. We spend a lot of tokens. Throw us some tokens, some AI. To echo what Josh says, is we need that adversarial constructive criticism right now. It's it's V0.1, right? It's a brand new baby. Come and tell us how ugly it is, right? So that we can progress the product. Coming by and back patting us does not help, right? And we like those.
I like that too.
It makes us very happy.
I'll give you guys a pat.
All right.
Thank you. We need some sometimes, but because we get beat up a lot. But ultimately that doesn't actually help, right?
Yeah.
Good job or whatever. It's like, no. Get in, run the node, break it. Don't put any money on it yet. Don't put any real Bitcoin on it yet. But we got some versions to get through. But come and use it. See what it looks like, right? And it's historic. You'll be downloading something that has nothing to do with core but runs Bitcoin, right? And there have been some other alternate implementations, but you're now running one that's 2026. Right?
And complete.
And complete. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we have pictures where it's peered and we've IBD'd, and like we've been able to receive the blockchain from both core and knots at the same time, right? So we've kumbaya'd with the two of them, and we all look at that website the same. So come and experience that. Come download it, put it on it, and go, wow, I can surf Bitcoin, and it doesn't have to be one of these two. And it's 100% Bitcoin.
It's
right?
a very exciting time, and I look forward to sharing it with everybody and getting some more releases out there soon. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Stop by our website, bitcoincommons.org. If you want your website, if they want to know about
it's sccsov.com, sexsov.com. Have a whole bunch of articles there about Bitcoin governance, argument maps, funding maps, demographic appeal maps, all sorts of stuff. It's all Bitcoin all the time. Also, the governance analysis is there as well. So
that's hot too. Go
tons
check
of
it
research.
out. That blew up on Twitter a little bit. That governance analysis. Yeah, that's and there's some interesting stuff, and that's a repo itself that people can
Yeah,
mess with.
if
Yeah.
you're into research, we're doing research as well. And when we did obviously we did to not belabor the point too much, we did the analysis, so we made sure we don't repeat the same mistakes. And so, we're trying to track every angle of this, and any help, we're going to need help for that.
For those that are kind of more from my background, TradFi side, Gil Roberts.substack.com. You can take a look. Right now I'm just building the academic case and the corporate case as to why something like this should happen. So, between the two of us, there's a cypherpunk and a personal individual sovereign reason to run this, and there's incentives to get more people into Bitcoin. And it's not just people, but now more entities, because that's where we're reaching. That's what we're reaching to, is that we're the individuals are coming along. Now it's time to bring the entities, because then we can get the orange. That's how we get the fiat out, right? We gotta unseat all that, and a lot of that's seated at these larger institutions.
Incredible. Well, Gil, Josh, I will pat you on the back a little bit. I think it's incredible what you guys are doing.
Thank you so much.
I think this is also the perfect topic for the first episode of the show.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We will absolutely have to have you back again. Hopefully this is a, multi-year project,
Of course.
in and of itself. But thank you guys so much for listening. Gil, Josh, congrats. Good luck.
Appreciate it.
Bon voyage. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. Thank you for having us.